etc. So, but animals with long canines doesn't necessarily mean that they were predators and meat eaters. Makes a really good story, I throw these jaws open and wham, stab, some hapless zebra, with these things and, just tear it to shreds. One of my favorite animals in the San Diego Zoo is the musk deer or the shepherd cane. It's a little deer, an Asian deer about this tall with little skinny legs, bottom one's about like my finger. And the males have saber-toothed canines. So it looks fake. I mean, they're just little things like this, and they've got big teeth that stick way down below the jawline, just like the saber cat. But they're simply sexual identity markers. And so, yeah, I'm a male. I've got these fangs, notice me. But they just eat leaves. And then some animals with fangs, big fangs like that, use them and big horns like rhino horns and stuff like that, use them to pry up roots. Okay, it's kind of, wouldn't make as good a story, but can you imagine the saber-toothed tiger? Boy, I'm glad I've got these things. I can dig up more roots and better roots and deeper roots than these other guys can. But they could actually be root diggers. That grizzly bear, those great big claws on a grizzly bear, they use those like a potato fork. They dig through the ground in the spring when the ground's wet, dig up meadow lily bulbs, and those lily bulbs are one of their favorite foods. And the rhinos use their horn, in this case, not like the tooth, but they use that to dig up. I was trying to think of the animal. I just read one the other day that uses big teeth like that to pry up roots and eat them. And so I guess the answer is we don't really know. How it was created, whether it mutated to form those longer fangs, or whether it was there and it was really designed originally as a root eater. But then when things went from bad to worse, in the environment after the flood, a lot of the plants animals depended on had died out or were very rare. And there was all this carrion left over from after the flood. And they may have started eating meat, plus mutations in that line may have ruined their digestive and enzymatic systems. And so they became dependent on meat. Notice how I did a real good job of not answering your question? Yes. Yes, they are, but to varying degrees. And so the fossils in Florida there, I've got one that's really heavily mineralized, almost like a western fossil. But, Florida's very shallow. There's a lot of leaching going on. There's a lot of rain. We get about 50, 60 inches of rain a year in Florida, and it's just sandy soil. People don't turn off their sprinklers during the rain because you get a 2-inch rain and 2 hours later it's dry as a bone. It just goes straight through. It's just like ground glass. And so that washes mineral out of the bone. They may have originally been even more mineralized. They are mineralized, most of them. Some of them would be leached, like that mammoth tusk I mentioned. Just everything was just rotted away. And then it's interesting how fast this can occur. So sometimes you'll find a bone in the river that's discolored. Some of you know a lot of the Florida rivers look like dark tea. And that's tannic acid from rotting acorns. In fact, it's the same thing that makes tea colored or black tea. And that stains the stuff right away. And then minerals can precipitate in the crystal or in the pore spaces very quickly. So once in a while, you'll find a ham bone or a T-bone, and it's obvious, it's a butcher cut bone. It's a center bone from a ham, or it's a T-bone steak, that somebody was having a barbecue, and they just threw this stuff in the river. But a lot of that has already stained. It's already that brown to black color, and some of it's already partially mineralized, even under conditions now, which wouldn't really favor fossilization. But it can happen fairly quickly. And they can also be demineralized very quickly if they get exposed to an area where there's a lot of flow through water continuously. They can lose some of the mineral. What evolutionists are finding now is that lots of fossil bones are only a little bit mineralized. And so I'm sure most of you have heard about, probably all of you, about the T-Rex femur from Montana. What was that, 2 or 3 years ago, was John Horner from the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman with Mary Schweitzer from University of North Carolina out there, and they'd found a T-Rex, and they'd plaster jacketed it, but the femur was too heavy for their helicopter to take back, so somewhat reluctantly they said, let's saw it in half, and we'll put it back together in the lab, because it was already in a nice plaster jacket. They saw it in half, and what? It's bleeding. Okay, so that is spectacular. They find blood cells, blood vessels, stretchable blood vessels. I'm not sure how stretchable mine are. and bone cells, actually cellular material. It's not mineralized. And it was only the outside crust of the bone that had really been mineralized. And now, they're telling us, well, what? And by the way, that wasn't really news. See, the media, except for some political statement of whoever they don't like, they forget. But when they found Sue, the T-Rex from South Dakota, years before, it had blood cells in it. And they kind of forgot that. They made it sound like this was a new discovery, but it was the second, the same thing. And so, and now they're saying, well, a lot of these fossil bones are only 2 or 3% mineralized, often just a crust around the outside. Now, some are really mineralized through and through. They're just solid rock. Some things like a manatee rib bone is rock to start with. Manatee is kind of a blubbery animal. If they didn't have heavy ribs, they'd float way up high in the water. They couldn't get down like that. So they're already rock to start with. And the fact is, I bet you the Indians use that for arrowheads. One of the hardest things in Florida is a fossil manatee rib. So it's become, evolutionists are admitting more and more that many of the fossils are not as mineralized. This is actually kind of a revolution in the study of fossils. Before, fossils were kind of left up to geologists who treated fossils as basically rocks with funny shapes. And biologists didn't get involved as much. Now, they had to for the vertebrate fossils because the geologists couldn't piece it together enough. But now biologists are getting much more involved in seeing things that a geologist wouldn't think to look for. Like this Mary Schweitzer said this T-Rex, she said when they uncovered it before they plaster jacketed, she said it had kind of a cadaver smell to it. See, she was used to working with rotting flesh, but no geologist would think a T-Rex bone was rotting.